Welcome to The Alternative Online, a ministry of the Alternative Family Church. Thank you for joining us.
Well, good night again. Welcome to our Bible study, Alternative Bible Study, where the Alternative family come together to study the Word of the Lord. So we want to welcome all of you that are watching us and those that are participating with us and have been following us on our social media platforms, the different social media platforms that we are using in order to stream our Bible study. So we want to welcome you, and we want you to feel welcome as we study the Word of the Lord. This time we are going to begin an entirely new study series and materials. Last couple of weeks we've been studying the church in time of crisis, what the church is all about and what should the church be about in times of crisis. So we are going to begin a new series of studies and lessons. So I want you to grab your Bibles, get your notepad, get your pen, get your family, tell the person who is at home with you to come together. Let's study the Word as we read it and as we delve into it. Well, in light of the current crisis, chaos, and pandemic that we have in COVID-19 coronavirus, many churches and nations around the world, globally speaking, would have to begin some rebuilding processes. They will begin some process of rebuilding, restarting and reshaping so many things that have been affected. In the context of the church, we know that the church is affected in the sense of her financially. She's affected severely financially because she have to now being able to provide and supply the needs so for so many people who are actually in need, but also for the incomes that are not going in. So the church have to be, in a sense, shaky and fragile in respect to her finances, but also in her worship setting and corporate worship setting. The church used to gather weekly on the weekend to study the Word and to worship and to exalt God in a corporate communal setting. But also the church has been affected in her fellowship. You know, we have to now be distant, physically distant from each other, not only socially distant, but I don't think that's possible in a sense, but physically we have to be from a distance, trying to build that relationship. So there are some restructuring and some rebuilding processes that the church will have to begin to do and to repair that have been broken because of this crisis of the COVID-19. When it comes to the world have to also reflect on the way how they will begin starting rebuilding process of the economic structure, the health system structure that has been weakened. It is fragile. So therefore the world would have to, the nations of the world would have to make some adjustment and some rebuilding process. This led me to think of a man and of a book in the Old Testament particularly that deal with a situation sort of similar to the one that we are dealing with globally, and the situation and the context in which these people were dealing in their reality is similar, and we can compare it to our time and to our period and to our context. It is the reality of dealing with crisis, chaos, and also rebuilding after a crisis and a chaos. The book is Nehemiah. It's the book of Nehemiah. And the man that wrote that book is Nehemiah. So I want to invite you to, let's go on a journey to study this book. We are going to entitle it Rebuilding. Where do we start? Where do we start? That's the title that I want us to think and to be reflecting on as we peruse through this book of Nehemiah. So for you that are tuning with us and participating with us with our Bible study and our journey through this book of Nehemiah, I want you to have that question present. Where do we start? Where do we start our rebuilding process? Where do we start rebuilding where we are unable to meet, unable to gather together on a weekly basis, unable to fellowship as we used to? How do we rebuild from there? How do we come out strong and we come back up on our feet and be able to manage this kind of situation? Well, the book of Nehemiah is going to teach us. And I want you to be tighten your seatbelts, because we are going now on this journey, on this flight of the book of Nehemiah. And when we look at the book of Nehemiah, there are some important details that we need to understand about this book. For instance, historically, in the English Bible, we have Nehemiah separated from the book of Ezra. But when you look at the Hebrew Bible, Nehemiah and Ezra, they read along. They are one book. As a matter of fact, for us to understand the context of the book of Nehemiah, we have to revert back, and we have to refer back to the book of Ezra, because in the book of Ezra is where we find most of the historical context for the book of Nehemiah. The other thing too that is very important for us to understand contextually is that Nehemiah is an exiled Jew. He has been taken from his land, and he has been now serving as cupbearer under a foreign governor, a foreign king. And also, this is the period that we call post-exilic. Post-exilic is technically like if a islander or a native right-side person would leave San Andres because of pressure that he found here, and he cannot work and he cannot make a living here on the island of San Andres, and he will leave the island to live somewhere else that is not his island. That's what mean exile. It means that you cannot live inside of your land or inside of your home. You have been taken away that right, and you have been taken out of that privilege of having the advantage of living in your own space, meaning that what was yours has been taken away from you. This is what we have. Now, the post-exilic period now is like many people have actually returned. Okay, those that have survived the exile period that was prophesied for 70 years, many of them now return, what we call remnant, those that left after the period of exile. So that is what we call post-exilic. So these people are now back. But when they come back to Judah or Jerusalem, everything is in total waste, in destruction, in chaos. There is a chaos, there is a crisis that has affected Jerusalem. And therefore, we find Nehemiah in this context, writing and reflecting and looking at this particular situation and thinking, what must I do in order to help my people to deal with this reality of a crisis? So when we look at the book of Nehemiah, we find Nehemiah answering the question, where do I start to help my people to rebuild? That's what Nehemiah is trying to help us to see and to understand. Where do we start from here? Where do we go from here? Like what Martin Luther King said, where do we go from here? After reflecting upon the nation and see how the nation was operating, he asked the question in his book, where do we go from here? So the invitation now is for us to answer this question today in light of all that we are facing as a church, as a community, as a nation. In light of all this that we are facing, where do we go from here? What do we do now? Okay, so I want you to write down this question and ask, where do we start? Okay, so when you look at the book of Nehemiah, the question that you need to be asking as we go through this journey of studying is, where do we start? So I want you to go through it. I want you to write down, where did Nehemiah start? What did he do? How did he do it? And also we need to keep that in mind. So we find that Nehemiah understood that Judah is the place where God's presence would dwell. In verse 9 of chapter 1 of Nehemiah, he said that this is the place where your presence dwell. Meaning this is Jerusalem. This is the place where the presence of God is. How is it that we are going to let this place go to total waste and destruction? So Nehemiah is answering these doubts in respect to what is taking place. He's trying to grapple, and he's trying to deal with this reality that he's facing. Jerusalem is the city of God. It's the place where the presence of God dwells. And look at it now. Would we leave this place like that? He's looking back now and trying to answer the question, would we, as the people of God, leave this place that God has prepared for us the way it is in chaos? Therefore, that's why it's important. That's why we are entitling this series of lessons through the book of Nehemiah. Where do we start? So he's trying to find the answer to this question, where do we start? So Keep those things in mind for you to be able to read. Let me give you an outline for you to be able, as an opening and an overview of the book, so that you can read on your own also, and then you can read it within this overview and outline that I'm providing for you right now. From Nehemiah chapter 1 until chapter 7, you can categorize it. I call it the rebuilding of their identity. They go through that period of rebuilding. That's where Nehemiah is giving a succinct and a detailed account of how they went about rebuilding. Okay, how they went about rebuilding. So he's rebuilding their identity because the wall was broken. A wall was signified in that time. It was a very important thing. We will get into that later on. But a wall was significant because it represents the identity of the people, that they found security in that wall. They put their trust in the fact that no enemy could come and trespass their boundary. But we notice that the Babylonians, they came in and ransacked everything and moved them out and things like that. So their security know how to become God. So he also rebuilt their faith from chapter 8 until chapter 10. We can look at that. Where Nehemiah underwent also looking at the covenant, rebuilding their faith. He's talking a lot about the covenant in this book. So rebuilding their identity, rebuilding their faith. And then in chapter 11 until chapter 12, he's rebuilding their worship. That's what I call it. Rebuilding their worship as they dedicate back the one and the finished product of the work as they rebuild. Rebuilding their identity in chapter 1 until chapter 7. Rebuilding their faith from chapter 8 until chapter 10. And rebuilding their worship from chapter 11 until chapter 12. And then in chapter 13, we have rebuilding their holiness, calling back the people to live a life that is pure and a life that is aligned in the context of what God is expecting from them. Now, so with that being said, with that overview and historical context, I want you to personally be reading that book. I don't want to go much in the meat of and the substance of the historical and the historical cultural context and the milieu where this book is written. As we read it through, then I will refer back to some of the historical context and the overview. I want to jump right into this subject that this question that we are trying to answer in this book. Where do we start? I believe the best place for us to start, it starts with you. Why? Because remember, in Nehemiah 1, as we are going to read it now, Nehemiah was not a priest. Nehemiah was not a Levite who lead worship. Nehemiah was just a common Jewish boy. But he was not so common because he is now the cupbearer, the most trusted servant of the king. Before the king would drink a wine or eat anything, Nehemiah was the one who had to taste it before. So he trusted Nehemiah. Nehemiah was up in the ranks of the oppressors or the foreign government and the foreign king's rank. He had a high position. No, that position would have made him comfortable and at ease where he was at. But Nehemiah understood that if he's going to make a change and if Jerusalem would be restored and be rebuilt, it had to start somewhere. Where it had to start from? It starts from him. I want to make that statement clear. It starts with you. Why? Because if you read chapter 1, and I want us to look at it in chapter 1, let's look at chapter 1, and then let's look at verse 1 in the book of Nehemiah. Nehemiah chapter 1, and in verse 1, it says, the words of Nehemiah. That means that Nehemiah is the writer or the author of this book, the son of Hakaliah. Now it happened in the month of Chislev. Chislev is the month that we call November, between November and December, month 11 and 12 in our calendar. In the 20th year, as I was in Susa, the citadel, look at verse 2, that Hanani, one of my brothers, that means that Hanani used to go out and look over the places that belonged to the king. And he used to go far as he could to see where they would possess next. So he went all over to Jerusalem and to Judah. And listen to what happened. One of my brothers came with certain men from Judah. And I asked, listen to what Nehemiah have here. I want you to underline that because this is very important. And I asked them concerning the Jews who escaped. That word asked is very important because that word asked in the Hebrew language, it means to inquire, to get information, to research, to implore, to beg information. Okay, it's the same words that we find, also the same word that we find with the psalmist. Then when I asked of the Lord, that's the same word that they are asking for information, wants to know, wants to be informed. So it starts with you. How it starts with you? First, it starts with you by being informed. You need to be informed. You need to be informed at what? At the situation that is happening around you. You need to be educated about what is taking place, what is happening to people right now through this period of pandemic and crisis. How are people managing their finances? People are in our community are in need. Look at Nehemiah. Nehemiah asked concerning concerning Judah, for those that escaped, meaning for those that survived. Let's continue to read at verse 2. Who had survived the exile, and concerning Jerusalem. In other words, what we find here in Nehemiah was informed. Nehemiah wanted to be informed. Nehemiah wanted to inquire about the situation. Listen to this. For you to start rebuilding, you need to be able to know the needs around you. You need to know what is happening around you. You need to know what is taking place. You need to know what has been destroyed. You need to make an inventory of things that has been destroyed and things that are needed. So Nehemiah inquired about the need of those that have survived. So that's sort of kind of leadership, right? The leadership is to not only be discriminative, like to know only certain amount of people, but to know what is happening to the nation. And this is the first thing that Nehemiah is teaching us. We need to be informed as to what is happening around us. One of the things that is killing us, many of us as believers, is that we are lacking information, even to study the word of the Lord. We are lacking information as to the background and the backdrop of a particular book or a text within the context that we are studying. We lack information in those aspects and we make misinterpretation. So the lack of information can lead to misinterpretation. So Nehemiah understood that for him to begin working and for him to start to do something to restore and to rebuild, he had to have the information, so that information will lead him to create a solution for the need of the people. So the need of the nation was to be restored, was to be rebuilt. And for him to start, he needed to be informed as to what was taking place around him and around the people them that he would have to lead. So he inquired. He got informed. And so where do we start? We start with you. And where do you start? You start by getting yourself informed, getting yourself educated about what is happening and what is taking place. Nehemiah understood what was happening to his people, and that led him to action. You see, when you have information, and for you to get solution, it will lead you eventually to action. So information leads to create a solution, and that solution leads to action. So look at Nehemiah. Nehemiah get information. That information that he gathered led him to a solution. Where do we start? And what was the solution? He needed to take action. As we see in the opening of chapter 2. Yes, before he took the action of going to the king, he prayed. You need to be informed. You also need to be prayerful. Be informed, but also be prayerful. What does that even mean? Look at, as you continue to read in verse 3. And they said to me, the remnant there in the province who had survived the exile is in great trouble. See, he knew what was happening to the people, and shame. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates are destroyed by fire. And look at verse 4. As soon as I heard these words, as soon as I am informed about what is happening in the nation of Jerusalem and Judah, look at what he said. As soon as I heard these words, I sat down and wept and mourned for days. And I continued fasting and listen to that, praying before the God of heaven. I like that. he began fasting and praying. He did not run to the king first. He did not run to any other person first. He ran away and prayed, fasted. So the information that he gathered led him to pray, to intercede, to go before God and implore to God and to bring that situation to God so that God will do something. This is very crucial, because when we look back now in chapter 2, and when we look back in chapter 3, when he is able now to gather the people to work in chapter 3 of the same book of Nehemiah, and in chapter 2, when he been able to talk to the king. For instance, this king Artaxerxes was the one who also stopped the rebuilding process of Ezra. Ezra is contemporaneous with Nehemiah. So he stopped, you can look at in reference of Ezra chapter 4, verse 21, come down. Ezra chapter 4, verse 21, come down at the end of that chapter, you find that this king in verse 21 said, stop the rebuilding process. No, Nehemiah understood that for me not to go with this information, knowing that this king has before stopped the rebuilding process, and I want to start something, I have to have some kind of favor from God. God have to move on the heart of this king. God have to move on the heart of people. So that's one I think that I want to bring up. See, we need to pray so that God can move on the hearts of leaders, of kings, and people who are leading nations, and people who are leading a situation in this crisis right now, so that God can give favor, can grant you favor, so that God will deal with these people, so that they will make the right decision. Prior and previously, we find that this king made the wrong decision by stopping the rebuilding process. But when we come to chapter 2, we find that this king now gave authorization and endorsement with a letter so that he could walk through the nation without any hesitation and opposition. Obviously, they have opposition, however, but he was able to move because the king gave the signature. So this king first rejected the notion of starting over by rebuilding. And now this king is endorsing this notion of rebuilding. So God was working. So we find that Nehemiah was informed, was prayerful. Let's continue to read. O Lord God of heaven, the great and awesome God who keeps covenant and steadfast love with those who love him and keep his commandments. So Nehemiah is giving us also a clue into the book. He's showing us that God is a God that keeps covenant. That God does not change the end deal of his bargain. If God said, I am going to restore you, God is going to restore you. If I'm going to heal you, I'm going to heal you. If I'm going to protect you from crisis and chaos, I'm going to protect you and I'm going to be with you. That means that God keeps his end of the bargain, even when we do not keep our end of the bargain. So many of us sometimes we walk away from God and we are not destroyed and we are not being put to shame, broken down by the word and by the situation. You know why? Because God keeps his end of his bargain. The hand of God is keeping you. It's the protection of God is keeping. It's the grace and the mercy of God that is upon you, that has not allowed situation and circumstances to destroy you. And this is what Nehemiah remembered. Nehemiah prayed to the God of, in other words, he contemplated on the greatness of God. On the greatness of God. So his prayer having the aspect of contemplation, contemplating who God is. And then we continue to read when he said, let your ear be attentive and your eyes open to hear the prayer of your servant, that I know pray before you day and night for the people of Israel, your servants, confessing the sins of the people. That means that he's confessing, he's contemplating in his prayer, and he's confessing sins of his people, Israel, which we have sinned against you. Even I and my father's house have sinned. So we have an next clue here for the book of Nehemiah. What is the next clue? Not only that the greatness of God is evident as a keep God of covenant, also it is evident here for Nehemiah that the people have turned their back on God. The people have been corrupted. The people have forsaken God's leadership. And listen to what he says. We have acted very corruptly against you and have not kept the commandments, the statutes, and the rules that you commanded your servant Moses. Remember the word that you commanded your servant Moses, saying, if you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the peoples. But if you return to me and keep my commandments and do them, though you are outcast in the outermost parts of heaven. From there I will gather them and bring them to the place that I have chosen to make my dwell there. They are your servants and your people, whom you have redeemed by your great power and by your strong hand. Look at verse 11 now. O Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of your servant and to the prayer of your servants who delight to fear your name, and give success to your servant today, and grant him mercy in the sight of this man. The very word pops up here, success, meaning that he was about to do something. So he's praying, okay, I get the information, I'm praying about the information that I receive, and I'm going to take action. So this is what we need to put into mind. The first thing about where do we start? Where do we start? We start with you, right? So what do you need to start to do? Be informed, be prayerful, but also be active. Nehemiah could pray that God give me success. If he was not going to do something, he would not need success. But because he determined that he was going to take action to, remember, the nation is destroyed. Everything is burned down. And he's now about to take action. So for the action that he's going to take, he wanted God to give him success. In other words, listen, the success of everything that you are going to do is in the hand of God. The proverb said, man plans his way, but the Lord is one who orders his steps. Or the Lord is the one who gives success. So we can plan how we want, but our actions will have success when God allows it to be successful. So where we start? So we start with you, right? And what we need to do? We need to be informed. Informed about the situation that is happening around us. Get educated. Read something about what is happening. Get to know more information about this virus. Get to know what is taking place with people in light of this situation. Get to know what economic process we can process so that we can help each other. What strategies we can build up. What plans we can come up with in order to address the situation that we are dealing with. Get informed. But also pray about the information that you have received. Pray about that God will give you insight as to what to do. And then take action. And then when you look at chapter 2, Nehemiah began to take action. He said, in the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was before him, I took up the wine and gave it to the king. No, I had not been sad in his presence. And the king said to me, why is your face sad, seeing you are not sick? This is nothing but sadness of the heart. Then I was very afraid. I said to the king, let the king live forever. Why should not my face be sad when the city, the place of my father's graves, lies in ruins, and its gates have been destroyed by fire? Then the king said to me, what are you requesting? So I prayed to the God of heaven. Listen, prayer again. I prayed to the God of heaven, and I said to the king, if it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in your sight, that you send me, you see, that is the plan, that you send me to Judah, to the city of my father's graves, that I may rebuild it. So by praying, God gave him the solution. You need to do something. Where do we start? We start with you, by being informed, by being prayerful, and by being active. What I mean by active? We need to get involved. We need to get involved with practical solutions to salvage the situation that are going. When was the last time you called somebody? When was the last time you encouraged somebody? When was the last time you called somebody on the phone and pray for them? Inquire about how they are doing. If they have been able to make ends meet. When was the last time you did that? See, Nehemiah did that. Nehemiah did that. He get information, he gathered information. And he went to the source that would be able to help him in order to help his people. So he had connection. So use your connection. Use your connection with those who are able to supply and provide for other people. Use your connection somehow in order to help people. Use your connection, use your influence in order to bring blessing and supply for people. So where do we start? We start with you.
You've just watched a message from The Alternative Online, a ministry of the Alternative Family Church. God bless you, and we hope you join us again soon.